Thanks, Mark, for what I'm sure was a wonderful introduction. I'm so sorry I can't be there with you in person today. I had a unexpected obligation come up in New York City, which is where I am, while you're watching this, but we were able to take time on Friday and film a message, and I'm grateful to everybody for allowing me to do that. I want to tell you that I've been asked, I think this is the third time I've been asked to give this talk, and the first two times I said no. And I was reluctant to do it, and I was reluctant to do it for two reasons. Well, initially my own grief really felt a little too raw, and I wasn't sure I could get up and actually talk about this. And secondly, I wasn't sure I was qualified. My wife Tia and I lost our daughter Jane when she was 6 months old. She was born prematurely. She never left the hospital. I have a 7-year-old now, Sarah, my other daughter, and you know, if you think of the death of a child as the death of a dream, the more real that the child is, the harder that dream is, I think. And that's why I was in some ways reluctant to do it, because I felt that grief was relative. One of the things I've learned since that time, though, and really through the process of writing my next novel, The Headmaster's Wife, was that in many ways grief is actually quite universal, and there are things that we all experience and can share, and it's in that spirit that I hope to talk with you a little bit today. Our daughter Jane was born at 27 weeks gestation. She weighed 1 pound, 14 ounces. The very first time I saw her, she was this high on a table. She looked like a cricket. There were doctors surrounded around her. But somehow she lived through that first day, and she lived through the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, and in many ways she was a miracle. And despite the shortness of her life, she was, for me and for my wife, an incredible gift. And I think particularly for me in some ways because she taught me so much, and you don't think about a baby teaching you things, but she taught me the importance of courage. In some ways, she taught me for the first time, even though I already was a father, how to really truly be a father. She taught me the power of stories. She taught me that the world is full of good and decent people. And she taught me, and I'm sure you all know this as well, that if there's any justice in the world, someday nurses will inherit the earth because they deserve it. Really, truly remarkable people. Jane spent her entire life at Dartmouth Hitchcock Hospital and 1 month at Children's Hospital in Boston. The NICU is a scary place. There's actually been studies in the New York Times that have come out that I've read since that people who spend a long time in the NICU, or even more than a week in the NICU, often exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that's similar to combat. And you know, in many ways, we were unusual. We were the second longest people in the 30-year history of that NICU to have stayed there. And there were good days, and there were bad days, and there were scary days, and there were moments of great joy, and there were moments when it looked like we were going to go home, and that everything was going to work out. I became the first parent in the history of the NICU to run the weekly doctors' meetings, and I remember Dr. Little, who had started the NICU, came into one of those meetings and was surprised to see a parent running the meeting, and afterward he walked out with me and said, can you come down the hall with me? And we walked down the hall, and he said to me, when I walked in there and saw you leading that meeting, at first I was pissed off. And then I thought, you know what? I'm a father. I would have done the same thing. And he said to me, you know, I'm famous for not shaking hands because he was afraid of germs and what he did for work, so he'd often shake hands like this. He said to me, I want to shake your hand. And so there were these amazing experiences, and many of them were captured every day in a blog that my wife wrote, that she started really to keep our family and friends informed because people wanted to call you all the time and find out what's happening every day. And so she started a blog, and what turned out and to be true is that she's actually a better writer than me, even though I'm someone who's done it for a living. And she wrote something that was very funny, very compelling. And as time went on, it wasn't just our family and friends who were reading it, but she had 5,000 readers a day. And when it became clear that there was not going to be a good outcome to Jane's life, that Jane was going to die, on the final day, the day that Jane actually did die in Boston, my wife's final blog post, she asked people to send our house postcards, her readers, that said Jane was here. And the reason she chose those words was from Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hears a Who, where the Who's say, a person is a person no matter how small. And the Who's are always yelling, we are here, wanting to be heard. And so my wife wrote this blog every day, and she had all these readers. And then a remarkable thing happened. The postcards started coming. They said Jane was here on them. People didn't just send postcards, they sent art, they sent quilts, they knitted things, they did all kinds of things that said Jane was here. And they came to our house. And at the end of a month, we had gotten postcards from all 50 states in the United States. And by the end of 3 months, we had gotten postcards from every single continent in the world, with the exception, of course, of Antarctica. And then, on the 1-year anniversary of Jane's death, we got a postcard from the Antarctica Science Station that just said simply, Jane was here. And that really struck me about how people can come together over just a very short life and a beautiful brown-eyed baby girl. I say that it made me a better father, and in some ways I think it did, and it taught me the power of stories, and both of those for me are intertwined. Because when Jane was in the hospital all the time, my daughter Sarah was 3. And I had not been a particularly hands-on father. I'd been starting a college, I was working on writing a novel. And Sarah and I were thrust together at times, and many times when my wife couldn't be there. And she was at first crying inconsolably until I began to tell her stories. And I made up stories. I made up what I could, because when you tell someone a story, sometimes they light up. And I told her about Mr. George Mouse, the mouse that lived in the laundry room. And I told her about Ernie, the curmudgeon squirrel who moved up here from Central Park to be closer to his family. And I told her about Chicken Bone Jones, the harmonica-playing skunk. And they became stories that we still tell to this day. And it was a very, very powerful experience for me. But I had the ability of handling my grief in some ways by turning it into art, or something I hope approaches art, and that's through my novel. And one of the questions I was contemplating in that book is, what happens when you lose a child, and how do you hold the rest of your life together? And what happens if instead of working hard to make that happen, you just shatter like glass? And so that's the subject matter, The Headmaster's Wife, and I want to read a small piece of that to you today that is from that book. And the novel is about a headmaster and a headmaster's wife who lose their child in Iraq. The craziest thing about grief, she decides in those moments when she is capable of such reflection, is how it numbs you. Nothing tastes good anymore. Nothing smells pretty. Sleep is elusive. She no longer dreams, and she thinks this might be because the dreams come when you are awake. They are the only things that are vivid to Elizabeth, and not even the rare early spring day, when she feels the sun warm on her face, can take her out of this. Maybe if she had someone to talk to, it would be better. But what can anyone possibly tell her that she cannot figure out on her own? Yes, others have grieved, but it is also so particular. She's not going to join some group so she can realize she is not alone. Nothing she feels surprises her other than this. It does not get better. In fact, it gets worse. When they arrived at her door to let her know her son was dead, she thought, I can handle this. This isn't that bad. And then the days that followed, she thought, look at me. I am handling it. I am strong and capable, as stout as a mother with a dead kid can be. But then it doesn't recede like the spring water. Instead, it grows in intensity, like a virus that takes over her body, until it seems it is all she is. There is no more her any longer. There is just this thing that happened, this place in the world where her son used to be. I want to end on a note from my first book that I wrote, Mirror Lake, which ends with a line, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I think it's particularly powerful for me and something that I think of every time I think of Jane, and that is, in the end, all we are, all we can ever be, are stories, stories that I have told, like I have told this one. And when you believe that fully, you can no longer be afraid, and you can no longer be alone. Thank you.